Alright class, today we're going to learn about the basics of the president and vice president. So the first thing you need to remember is that the part of the Constitution that covers the presidency, the vice president, the important information that you need to know is Article 2. Just like Article 1 is for the legislative branch or Congress, Article 3 is for the judicial branch or the courts, Article 2 is the section of the Constitution that covers the president. One of the important things in Article 2, the requirements the Constitution states a person must meet in order to be eligible to be our president. So the president, and by extension the vice president, has to be essentially three things. They have to be at least 35 years old. They have to have lived in the United States for at least 14 years. And the other thing that they need to be is what is referred to as a natural-born citizen. A natural-born citizen is someone who is essentially an American at birth. And you can meet this requirement in two ways. You can be born in the United States or in United States-controlled territory, or you can be born to parents who are American citizens. And if that's the case, it doesn't matter where in the world you're born. As long as you can meet one of those two requirements, you qualify as a natural-born citizen. So at age 35 plus, and after having lived in the country for 14 years, you too could be president. The president's term in office is 4 years. This means they have 4 years between elections. A president is also term limited. They can only serve for 2 terms. So typically, that would give a person a maximum of 8 years to serve as president. Few people have done more than 8 years. The image that you see on the screen at this time is a picture of Franklin Roosevelt. He was our president during the Great Depression and World War II. He was elected to the presidency 4 times and would have served 4 terms had he not died in his last term. Shortly after this Roosevelt presidency, the Constitution was amended by the 22nd Amendment, limiting presidents officially to just 2 terms. Now, there are some extra rules that would, in special cases, permit someone to serve more than 8 years or 2 terms, but we'll talk about those when we get to the vice president. So the president has a few specific responsibilities that you need to be aware of, understand. The first one on your list is the president's responsibility or role when it comes to the bureaucracy. So the bureaucracy is the part of our government that essentially handles all of the day-to-day work of government. You could think of day-to-day examples like the post office or the IRS. It handles taxes. Or on a state level, the DMV, where you might get your driver's license. It's all examples of bureaucracy. These are government offices and government employees that handle chores, forms, paperwork, enforcing the law, carrying out some mandate of our government in one way or another. The president's role in that organization is the sort of highest leader of that part of our government. President you can think of as the overall boss of the bureaucracy. The president also has a very important role when it comes to making laws. The president is responsible for signing bills into law. So the picture you're looking at now is an image of President Obama signing a bill that was passed by the House of Representatives and the Senate. And remember, when all 3 of those requirements are met, that bill becomes a law. It's a very important role of the president. The president is also responsible for enforcing those laws. Something you may want to add to this in your notes is that the president issues what's referred to as executive orders or ordinances. And these are essentially commands that the president gives that may illustrate how a law by Congress will be carried out, or fill in details that aren't part of the existing legislation. So this gives the president a little bit of leeway to run things outside the authority of Congress and bills that have been passed by the legislature. The president is also responsible for appointing many people to important positions in our government. The president appoints judges at the federal level. The president appoints cabinet members. The president appoints diplomats. The cabinet, members of the cabinet, are the president's close advisors who lead what's referred to as a cabinet department or an executive department. The Secretary of State or the Secretary of the Treasury or the Secretary of Defense might be a good example of a cabinet member, a cabinet position. Diplomats are representatives of the United States government that we send to other countries. So a diplomat may live in a foreign country and work in that country as a go-between or a representative of our country within that country's nation and government. All of these people were essentially picked to do the job that they hold by the president through his appointment power. The president is responsible for interacting with other countries. There are essentially two broad ways that you can think about how the president can interact with another country. Let's say two countries are in conflict with one another, and perhaps they want an agreement to end the war, to end the hostility. The document that would be created to do that is called a treaty. Presidents in the United States are responsible for meeting with other countries, drafting the treaties. They are also responsible for coming up with agreements between two countries that may happen outside of wartime. We can create what's referred to as an executive agreement with another country that we might be friendly with, that might shape how we trade with that country or interact with that country in another way. So here are two larger examples of how the president can interact with different countries depending on the circumstances we find ourselves in with that other country. The president has an important role in the military. He is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. This essentially means that the president is the highest-ranking military officer in the country. He is considered to be part of the chain of command in the military, and in fact, the highest position in the military. And this gives the president a lot of responsibility when it comes to waging war, when we fight other countries, or managing our own national defense. Presidents are also viewed as party chiefs, or leaders of their political party. So think about the fact that whenever a sitting president holds office, they are essentially viewed as the most important, either Republican or Democrat, depending on which party they came from. During President George W. Bush's term, President Bush was viewed as the most influential, important leader of the Republican Party, and likewise during President Obama's term, he was viewed as the most important or leader of the Democratic Party. So not only do they hold an important governmental position, they hold an important political position within our party system. Let's shift gears and start talking about the vice president. The vice president has one official job when it comes to the Constitution, and that is to serve as the president of the United States Senate. They don't have a lot of power in that position. Really, the only thing they can do is break ties if there's ever a tie vote in the Senate. But this is sort of the one title or responsibility that the vice president enjoys from the original Constitution. The vice president plays an important informal role as a chief assistant, helper to the president. They will help the president perform their day-to-day jobs and important tasks that might come down the pike. And the other important role that the vice president plays is in the event that the president is incapacitated. We normally think about this situation happening when a president dies. The image that you're looking at, in fact, right now is just such an event where a sitting president had been killed, and the vice president was selected to take over. So the event in the image happened shortly after the John F. Kennedy assassination. And John F. Kennedy's vice president is the man that you see in the center of the picture, Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson is being sworn in just a short while after President John F. Kennedy was declared dead. So what happened to Lyndon Johnson is that he finished out President Kennedy's remaining term, which happened to be about a year. And this goes back to my earlier point about how someone might be able to serve for more than 8 years as president. If someone happens to be a vice president, and the president that they're serving under is incapacitated or otherwise cannot perform their duty, so this could mean that they die, or that they resign, they quit, they're thrown out of office, that vice president will continue or pick up the rest of that former president's term. If they serve no more than 2 years of that sitting president's term, they can then run for 2 terms of their own, which would mean 4 years of one of their own terms, 4 years of another one of their own terms. All that happening after 2 years, at the most, of them filling in for the previous president, which would bring the grand total of time that a person can be president in this special instance up to 10 years. Let's look at how the president interacts with other branches of the government. One of the important ways that the president interacts with Congress is through a role that we call the chief legislator. Presidents, even though they're not part of the legislative branch, oftentimes come up with ideas for bills or laws or have some other shaping power or influence over the congressional agenda. A great example of this is the Affordable Care Act, which is popularly called Obamacare. Think about why that might be called Obamacare. The reason is because President Obama, during his campaign to win the election, initiated the idea behind that law and then made pushing that law through Congress a principal goal of his first term as president. So here we have an example of our executive branch leader pushing our legislative branch toward a particular goal that was their idea. And this gets right to the core of what it means to be our chief legislator. The other way that presidents interact with Congress has to do with what happens when a bill passes both houses. A bill for a new law will go through both houses of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, and if both of those bodies approve it, the president has final approval power. So one of the ways that the president can interact with that bill once it heads their way is that he can sign it and it becomes a law. The other way the president can interact with that bill is by vetoing the law. Vetoing, of course, is the president's way of saying, I forbid this from happening, I don't want this to happen. So a vetoed bill will be sent back to Congress with the president's reasons for why they cannot approve it. And Congress, of course, have to deal with it as they see fit. The president also has another power over Congress, which essentially involves him controlling their schedule. Presidents can call special sessions of Congress, essentially calling Congress back into Washington, D.C. to work during times that they would otherwise have been scheduled to be off and at home. When it comes to the courts, the president has a great level of influence over how the court do their job, because the president, remember, is the person responsible for picking the judges that will actually serve on the courts. And this is true not only for Supreme Court justices, but also for other judges at the federal level. So there's lots of federal courts, and the judges that run those courts, serve on those courts, are all picked by the president. And you can assume that the president is going to pick judges that they agree with, that they think like, and have some kind of commonality of ideology between the two. So please keep in mind that this is also where the president's primary check over the court system comes from, the ability to pick those judges. How does the president interact with other countries? There's an informal way. We refer to the president as our chief diplomat, our chief representative, dealing with other countries. Presidents interact with leaders from other countries during times of peace. And during times of war, the president is, of course, our commander-in-chief, and therefore the person making the wartime decisions with that other country that we're fighting with.